$8. That's what the crumpled bill represented, clutched in a small fist that trembled despite its owner's determination. As Harper Lynn stood at the corner of Waterfront Avenue, her gaze locked onto the man whose name parents invoked to make their children behave. She knew approaching him was dangerous, had heard the whispered warnings about Marcus Kane, but desperation makes children brave in ways adults can never understand. The late afternoon sun slanted through the industrial district, casting harsh shadows between warehouses and painting the cracked sidewalk in patches of gold and gray. Traffic hummed in the distance, the familiar rhythm of the city's heartbeat, while the smell of diesel and salt water drifted up from the nearby docks. A few pedestrians hurried past, their eyes carefully avoiding the solitary figure leaning against the black Mercedes, as if acknowledging him might somehow pull them into his orbit. Marcus Kane stood with practiced stillness, his charcoal suit tailored to perfection despite the urban grit surrounding him, his visible neck tattoos a stark declaration beneath his crisp white collar. No obvious security flanked him, yet the empty space around his car felt deliberate, protected by reputation rather than muscle. In this city, his presence alone was enough to bend the flow of foot traffic, to make grown men cross the street without consciously deciding to do so. Control the narrative before they write it for you. It was a principle that had carried him from nothing to everything, a lesson he'd learned in Blood and Leverage. Today, ironically, he had allowed himself this brief moment outside the fortress of his compound, checking on a waterfront property acquisition, calculating profit margins in the pause between meetings, a rare instant of exposure in a life built on calculated invulnerability. Marcus reviewed the day's ledger in his mind, the shipment schedules, the political favors owed, the debts coming due, when movement at the edge of his vision made him pause. A small figure, bright and impossibly out of place in this neighborhood, hovered near the corner bodega, gathering nerve with each shallow breath. Time fractured into slow motion as Harper Lynn forced her worn sneakers to move, her bright yellow bow catching the sunlight like a beacon, her pink dress far too cheerful for this street of shadows and rust. The $8 bill, 4 weeks of carefully hoarded allowance, every penny from returning bottles, every coin found in couch cushions, grew damp in her palm. She had faced down playground bullies without crying. This shouldn't be harder, yet her heart hammered against her ribs as if trying to escape what her mind had already committed to. The notorious crime lord had negotiated with cartel bosses, had watched men beg for mercy through broken teeth. Yet something in this child's direct approach unsettled the rhythm of his thoughts. Perhaps it was the wrongness of her presence here, a splash of innocent color in his monochrome world, or the quiet desperation that seemed to propel her forward despite obvious terror. Marcus tracked her immediately, his sharp instincts cataloging details even as his expression remained neutral, unreadable. The girl moved with purpose, and in his world, purpose always meant something. His hand dropped casually toward his phone, ready to signal Dante if this was some elaborate setup, some new play he hadn't anticipated. But her appearance told a different story. The pink dress was clean but faded, mended at one shoulder with stitches that spoke of careful hands and tight budgets. The yellow bow in her hair looked homemade, tied with more love than skill. Her eyes, large and hazel and far too knowing, carried a weight that childhood shouldn't hold. Behind her, keeping pace on the sidewalk, a German shepherd limped slightly, his dark eyes locked on the girl with absolute devotion, his coat dusty and his posture tense. She stopped exactly 4 feet from where he stood, maintaining distance like someone who understood predators, even if she couldn't yet name why. The dog settled beside her, protective despite his own visible distress. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice cutting through the ambient noise with surprising clarity despite how her hands shook. "Are you Marcus Kane?" The question hung in the charged space between them, reckless and dangerous and impossibly brave. He could have denied it, should have sent her away with a cold word or a sharp gesture as he did with every stranger foolish enough to intrude on his time. Instead, curiosity eclipsed caution. Something in her eyes, that strange absence of the terror he usually inspired, made him tilt his head slightly, a gesture that neither confirmed nor denied, but somehow gave her permission to continue speaking. Harper stepped closer then, closing the gap to 3 feet, and extended both hands with the crumpled $8 bill held between small fingers like an offering, like a contract sealed in childhood faith. "I need help, sir," she stated, her voice steady despite the impossible weight of this moment. "And I can pay." The absurdity of this child offering payment, $8 to a man who moved millions in a single phone call, should have provoked amusement, perhaps even a rare smile. Instead, the gravity in her expression, the way the German shepherd pressed against her leg as if lending her courage, stopped any reaction before it could form. Whatever desperation had driven her to the street, to this man, was no small thing. "It's for Kaiser," she continued, her voice cracking slightly on the dog's name, her hand dropping to rest on his head. "They took him. They're hurting him. And I heard you're the only one who can help." Marcus Kane, who had built an empire on reading lies, on detecting weakness, on exploiting the desperate, found himself staring at this small girl and her $8 and realized with uncomfortable clarity that she believed every word she was saying, and more unsettling still, he was listening. Marcus Kane didn't kneel for anyone. It was an unspoken rule in his world, a matter of positioning and power dynamics that kept him above the fray, always looking down rather than up. Yet something in the way Kaiser's breathing came labored, the way the dog's dark eyes flickered with pain and exhaustion, pulled him downward before conscious thought could intervene. The movement was fluid, practiced, his expensive suit folding as he crouched to meet the German shepherd at eye level, his hand extended slowly, palm down. And Kaiser's wet nose touched his knuckles with a gentleness that belied the animal's obvious suffering. Up close, Marcus could see the matted fur along the dog's shoulder, the fresh scars hidden beneath the coat, the slight favor of his right front leg. This wasn't just neglect. This was systematic cruelty. "They use him to train the fighters," Harper's voice broke through his assessment, small and fractured with barely controlled emotion. "The man, he makes the mean dogs attack Kaiser to make them more aggressive. He says Kaiser's too gentle to fight, so he's only good for practice." The words landed with unexpected force. Marcus's jaw tightened imperceptibly, his fingers moving to examine Kaiser's injuries with surprising tenderness. The dog didn't flinch, didn't growl, simply leaned into the touch as if starving for any kindness. In that moment, Marcus saw what the girl saw, not a damaged animal, but a loyal friend being systematically destroyed. Have you ever felt so powerless that you'd risk everything, even your own safety, to save someone you love? Harper had crossed that threshold the moment she heard Kaiser's location. "How do you know where he is?" Marcus asked, his voice low and controlled, though something dangerous flickered behind his eyes. "Tommy Reese, he took Kaiser 3 days ago, said we owed him money for the space our apartment takes up." Harper's hands tightened around the $8 bill. "He said if I didn't bring him $50 by tonight, Kaiser would be dead by morning. This is all I have, Mr. Kane, but I heard you can make people do things. I heard you're more powerful than anyone." Tommy Reese. The name registered immediately in Marcus's mental database, a small-time enforcer, a bottom feeder who ran an underground dogfighting ring in the old meatpacking district. More importantly, Tommy Reese owed Marcus $17,000 from a gambling debt that was now 4 months overdue. The man had been avoiding Marcus's collectors, hiding in the rat holes of the city, thinking himself too insignificant to warrant personal attention. He had just become very significant. Marcus straightened to his full height, and for the first time since Harper had approached, he truly looked at her, not as a curiosity or an interruption, but as a client presenting a problem that demanded his particular brand of solution. He reached out and took the crumpled $8 bill from her trembling fingers, smoothing it carefully before folding it into his inner jacket pocket. "This is a contract, kid," he said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "You've just hired me, and I don't break contracts." Harper's eyes widened, hope and disbelief warring across her young features. "You'll save him? You'll bring Kaiser home?" Marcus glanced down at the German shepherd, whose tail gave one weak, hopeful thump against the pavement. $8, a child's life savings, an impossible request delivered with desperate courage. In his world, such transactions were built on millions, on leverage and fear and calculated violence. Yet standing on this waterfront street, watching the last rays of sunlight catch the yellow bow in this girl's hair, Marcus Kane made a decision that would ripple far beyond a single dog's rescue. "Consider it done," he said. "Now tell me everything you know about where Tommy Reese is keeping the dogs." If you're already hooked by this unlikely alliance, hit that subscribe button, because what Marcus does next will absolutely shock you. Trust me, you won't want to miss how a crime lord's empire gets turned into a rescue operation. The details spilled from Harper in fragments, each word costing her something. The warehouse on Pier 17, the metal cages stacked 3 high, the sounds that haunted her sleep, growls and yelps, and the terrible silence that followed. She described Tommy Reese's operation with the clinical precision of a child who'd been forced to grow up too fast, her small hand never leaving Kaiser's head, as if physical contact could somehow transmit safety across the distance that separated them. Marcus listened without interruption, his mind already constructing the tactical landscape. Pier 17 was abandoned officially, condemned by the city 2 years ago after a structural fire. Unofficially, it had become exactly the kind of shadow space where men like Tommy Reese conducted business the daylight wouldn't tolerate. The location explained why his collectors hadn't found the man. He'd been hiding in plain sight, in a place too worthless for Marcus's organization to bother monitoring. That oversight ended tonight. "He has maybe 6 or 7 men," Harper continued, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "They come at night. I followed them once, before Tommy caught me, and—" She touched her hairline briefly, where Marcus had noticed the fading bruise earlier. The gesture completed the sentence she couldn't speak aloud. Something cold settled in Marcus's chest, a familiar sensation he had learned to recognize as the moment before he made decisions that altered lives permanently. He'd built his empire on calculated brutality, on knowing exactly how much pressure to apply and where. Emotional responses were liabilities, weaknesses his enemies could exploit. Yet standing here, watching this child fight back tears while describing her dog's torture, he felt something he'd thought long dead stir beneath the carefully constructed armor of his reputation. Perhaps it was the absurdity of the transaction itself, $8 for a favor worth thousands in execution costs. Perhaps it was Kaiser's trusting eyes, or the way Harper had approached him with more courage than grown men demonstrated when begging for their lives. Or perhaps, in some buried corner of his conscience, he recognized what he was really being offered: a chance to use his terrible power for something other than accumulation and control. What would you do if you had the power to save someone, but it meant crossing lines you'd drawn for yourself? Marcus was about to find out if he still knew where those lines existed. He pulled out his phone, the gesture smooth and practiced, his thumb already scrolling to Dante's contact. His lieutenant would be at the compound by now, finishing the evening security briefing. One call would set machinery in motion that Tommy Reese couldn't possibly comprehend until it was far too late. "I need you to understand something," Marcus said, his attention shifting back to Harper with an intensity that made her straighten unconsciously. "When I take this money, when I accept this contract, I don't do things halfway. You're not just hiring me to get your dog back. You're hiring me to make sure the man who took him never hurts another animal again. That's what $8 buys in my world. Absolute resolution." Harper nodded, her jaw set with determination that mirrored his own. "Good. He deserves worse than whatever you're planning." The statement, delivered with such casual conviction from someone who should still believe in fairness and second chances, told Marcus everything he needed to know about what this child had witnessed. Tommy Reese had created his own nemesis in the form of a 9-year-old girl with $8 and nothing left to lose. Dante answered on the second ring, his voice carrying the practiced neutrality of a man who understood that phone calls from Marcus Kane after business hours meant someone's world was about to shift dramatically. "Boss, I need a full workup on Tommy Reese. Last known location, current operations, personnel count, and every single dollar he owes us." Marcus kept his voice low, professional, though Harper stood close enough to hear every word. He'd learned long ago that transparency in the execution phase built trust, And right now, this child needed to trust that her $8 had purchased real action. The brief silence on Dante's end spoke volumes. Tommy Reese was small time, barely worth the digital ink in their accounting system. The dogfighter? Boss, he's 17,000 in arrears as of last reconciliation, 4 months overdue. Marcus's tone sharpened. Pull everything. I want to know what hand he wipes with. 30 minutes. Understood. The line went dead without ceremony. Marcus glanced down at Harper, whose eyes had widened at the casual mention of $17,000, a sum so incomprehensible it might as well have been 17 million. Go home. Stay inside. I'll send word when Kaiser's safe. I want to come with you, she said immediately, predictably. No. The word was absolute, non-negotiable. What I'm about to do isn't something children should witness. You trusted me with your money. Now trust me with the work. 28 minutes later, Marcus sat in his compound's operations room, a space that resembled a corporate boardroom more than a criminal headquarters. Dante had assembled the intelligence with characteristic efficiency, spreading documents across the mahogany table like a prosecutor building a case. Except in this court, Marcus served as judge, jury, and executioner. Tommy, the trainer Reese, Dante began, his distaste evident in the way he handled the photographs, runs an unlicensed fighting ring out of Pier 17, specializes in what he calls bait dogs, animals he uses to train fighters. He's been operating 18 months, moving locations every few weeks to avoid animal control. Marcus studied the surveillance photos Dante had pulled from various sources. Tommy Reese looked exactly like what he was, a bottom feeder with delusions of significance, scarred knuckles, cheap tattoos, eyes that carried the specific cruelty of men who hurt things weaker than themselves because nothing stronger would engage with them. Revenue stream? Marcus asked. Gambling mostly, small bets, local crowd. He's pulling maybe 3,000–4,000 a week. Barely covers his operation costs. Dante slid another document forward. Our debt originated from a poker game at Sal's. He thought he could bluff his way into our circle. Lost badly. Has been dodging collections ever since. Marcus's expression remained neutral, but internally the equation was solving itself. Men like Tommy Reese existed in every criminal ecosystem. Parasites who created more problems than profit, whose cruelty served no strategic purpose. They operated without code, without honor, without the discipline that separated Marcus's organization from common thugs. They were, in essence, bad for business and worse for the neighborhood's fragile equilibrium. He hit a child, Marcus said quietly. And he's torturing her dog. Dante's jaw tightened. Even in their world, certain lines existed. What's the play, boss? Marcus leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin, in the gesture Dante recognized as his boss calculating angles, weighing consequences against desired outcomes. The room fell silent except for the subtle hum of the building's ventilation system and the distant city sounds filtering through bulletproof windows. Standard collection protocol would be, what? Break his legs, take whatever assets he has, write off the rest as bad debt? Marcus posed the question rhetorically, his gaze fixed on Tommy Reese's photograph. That's what he expects. That's what small-time operators like him budget for when they gamble beyond their means. Dante nodded. Standard play, in and out, nobody notices. He limps for 6 months and eventually pays in installments. That's not what's happening here. Marcus's voice carried a cold finality. Men like Tommy Reese are parasites. They don't contribute. They don't follow codes. They prey on the vulnerable and poison neighborhoods we've spent years stabilizing. He's been operating in our territory, dodging our debt, and now he's abusing children and animals for entertainment. That's not just disrespect, that's pollution. The distinction mattered in Marcus's carefully constructed hierarchy. Violence had its place, served specific purposes, maintained necessary order. But cruelty for its own sake, suffering as recreation, that was something else entirely. Something that reminded him uncomfortably of the chaos he'd worked decades to rise above. We're going to offer him a choice, Marcus continued, his strategic mind assembling the operation's parameters. Debt forgiveness in exchange for every dog in that warehouse? his immediate departure from the city, and his permanent exit from this line of work. He gets 24 hours to disappear. If he's still here after that, the debt comes due with interest he can't possibly pay. Dante absorbed this, understanding the elegance of the approach. He'll take it. Men like him always choose survival over pride. And if he doesn't, Marcus allowed a thin smile, then we'll remind him why $17,000 is the least expensive problem he's currently facing. The operation required surgical precision, no police attention, no media coverage, nothing that would draw scrutiny to Marcus's organization, or more importantly, back to Harper. The girl had shown remarkable courage approaching him, but that courage shouldn't cost her safety. This needed to look like Tommy Reese simply decided to relocate his failing business venture, a common enough occurrence in the underground economy. Take 6 men, no weapons visible, but everyone armed. I want this to feel like a business negotiation that could turn lethal, not a raid. Marcus pulled up a digital map of Pier 17 on the wall screen, marking entry points and sight lines with practiced efficiency. 2 vehicles, standard convoy protocol. You go in through the main entrance, make him come to you. I want him off balance but rational enough to understand his options. Would you risk everything you've built to save an innocent life? Or would you protect your empire first? Marcus had just chosen his answer, and it surprised even him. What about the dogs? Dante asked. We're not equipped to handle traumatized animals. I've already made a call. Dr. Sarah Chen at Metropolitan Veterinary will have her emergency team standing by. She owes me a favor from that zoning issue last year. She'll ask no questions and keep no records. Marcus checked his watch. I want Kaiser identified first. He goes directly to treatment. The others get assessed and placed through her rescue network. And the girl? Harper? She gets her dog back tomorrow morning, healthy and safe. That's the contract. Pier 17 squatted at the waterfront's edge like a rotting tooth, its condemned structure silhouetted against the sodium lights of the industrial district. Dante's convoy arrived at 11 p.m., 2 black SUVs rolling to synchronized stops outside the warehouse's rusted main doors. The building exhaled the stench of decay and desperation. Salt-corroded metal, stale water, and beneath it all, the unmistakable odor of animals living in fear. No guard stood watch. Tommy Reese's operation relied on obscurity rather than security, the assumption that nobody important enough to matter would bother looking this direction. That assumption died the moment Dante's boots hit the cracked concrete, 6 men fanning out behind him with the practiced efficiency of a military unit. Inside, the warehouse stretched into shadows punctuated by hanging work lights. The sound hit first. Low growls, anxious whining, the rattle of chain-link kennels stacked in haphazard rows. Dante counted 14 dogs in various states of distress, their eyes reflecting the harsh lighting like dozens of tiny mirrors broadcasting silent accusations. Tommy Reese emerged from a back office, his posture radiating false confidence that evaporated the moment he recognized the caliber of men standing in his domain. This is private property. You can't just... You owe Marcus Kane $17,000. Dante's voice cut through the protest with surgical precision. 4 months overdue. We're here to discuss repayment terms. The color drained from Tommy's face. He'd been dodging street-level collectors, men he could potentially outrun or buy off with excuses. But Dante's presence meant the debt had been elevated beyond standard collection protocol. That meant Marcus himself had taken personal interest. That meant Tommy's calculations had just become catastrophically inadequate. I can get the money. I just need more time, couple more fights. No more fights. Dante stepped forward, and 2 of his men moved to flank Tommy's position, boxing him into a space where his options became very clear, very quickly. Here's what's happening. You're forgiving the debt in exchange for every dog in this warehouse. Then you're leaving the city. Tonight. You have 1 hour to pack whatever fits in your car and 24 hours to cross the state line. After that, if we see you again, the debt comes due with interest calculated at rates you won't survive paying. Tommy's eyes darted toward the kennels, mental arithmetic visible in his panicked expression. Those dogs represented his income, his operation, everything he'd built from nothing. You can't just take, we're not taking, we're offering you a choice. Dante's tone remained conversational, almost friendly, which somehow made the threat more visceral. The dogs, or we discuss repayment through traditional channels. I promise you'll prefer the first option. The silence stretched for 3 heartbeats before Tommy's shoulders sagged in defeat. The shepherd's in the big corner. That's the one you want, right? The girl's dog? Dante nodded to his team. 2 men moved immediately toward the indicated kennel, while another began documenting the other animals with his phone, photographing conditions for Dr. Chen's records. They found Kaiser pressed against the back of his cage, his body language screaming trauma despite the tentative hope in his eyes when unfamiliar hands reached for his collar. Easy, boy. Marco, Dante's most experienced handler, murmured as he carefully secured a lead. You're going home. 30 minutes later, Dante's phone buzzed as Kaiser disappeared into Dr. Chen's emergency clinic. He read the confirmation text before forwarding it to Marcus. Package secured, trainer en route to border, 13 additional rescues transferred to veterinary care. Marcus's reply was instantaneous. Good. Status on primary package? Surgery in progress. Doc says he'll make it. Sarah Chen worked under surgical lights that turned the operating room into a theater of precise brutality and careful salvation. Kaiser lay unconscious on the steel table, his breathing regulated by machines, his injuries exposed under her experienced hands. 3 cracked ribs, lacerations requiring 47 stitches. A partially torn ligament in his right shoulder, internal bruising consistent with repeated blunt force trauma. The clinical assessment painted a portrait of systematic abuse that made even her seasoned veterinary team exchange grim glances. Whoever did this to him deserves worse than jail, her assistant murmured, adjusting the IV drip. Sarah didn't disagree, but she also didn't comment. Marcus Kane's instructions had been explicit. Save the bomb, Yeshua's questions, keep no official records. She owed him that much and more after he'd made her zoning problems disappear when the city tried to shut down her clinic's expansion. In her world, such debts were paid without hesitation or moral equivocation. The surgery stretched into its 3rd hour. Sarah repaired damaged tissue with the same meticulous attention she'd give a championship show dog, because in her operating room, every life held equal value regardless of pedigree or payment status. Kaiser's strong heart and young constitution worked in his favor, his body fighting alongside her efforts with the resilience of an animal who desperately wanted to survive. By 2 a.m., she stepped back from the table, stripping off bloodied gloves with the satisfied exhaustion of work done well. He'll need 2 weeks of intensive care, then another month of restricted activity, but he'll recover fully. No permanent damage to his mobility or quality of life. The text she sent to Marcus contained only facts. Surgery successful, full recovery expected. Patient stable. His reply arrived seconds later. Cost? Already paid. She meant the zoning favor, but also something more. The satisfaction of being part of a story where cruelty met consequences and innocence got protection. While Kaiser slept under medical supervision 3 miles away, Marcus sat in his compound's security office reviewing documents his information specialist had compiled with characteristic thoroughness. Harper Lynn's background unfolded across multiple screens in data points that told a story of struggle rendered in bureaucratic language. Single mother, Rebecca Lynn. Diagnosed with stage 2 lupus 18 months prior. Employment history, sporadic food service work, terminated 3 times due to illness-related absences. Current income, disability payments insufficient to cover rent in their deteriorating apartment building. Harper's school records showed perfect attendance despite wearing the same rotation of 4 outfits, teacher notes mentioning she rarely bought lunch, and a principal's annotation. Bright student, obvious poverty, recommends social services evaluation. The building itself was owned by a shell corporation that Marcus's analysts traced back to Tommy Reese's cousin, explaining why the rent debt existed despite Rebecca's meticulous payment records. They'd been systematically squeezed by a predator who saw their vulnerability and opportunity. Marcus studied a photograph pulled from Harper's school file. The same yellow bow, the same determined eyes, but captured in a moment of genuine smile that the desperate girl on the waterfront hadn't possessed. That smile felt like an accusation and a responsibility simultaneously. Pull financials on the mother's medical situation, he instructed his analyst. Treatment options, costs, prognosis with proper care versus current trajectory. And find out what it would take to relocate them somewhere that isn't owned by someone actively trying to destroy them. The analyst nodded, recognizing the tone that meant this wasn't a request for information. It was the beginning of an operation whose scope had just expanded far beyond retrieving one dog. Marcus Kane had built his empire on understanding that power wasn't just about force. It was about infrastructure, about controlling the systems that determined who thrived and who merely survived. Over the next 72 hours, he deployed that understanding with surgical precision, each intervention carefully designed to appear coincidental rather than coordinated. The first domino fell when Clearwater Properties, a legitimate real estate holding company Marcus owned, through 3 layers of corporate insulation, purchased Harper's building. The announcement arrived via certified letter to all tenants. Mandatory renovations due to code violations would require temporary relocation. Displaced families would receive priority placement in Clearwater's renovated units at significantly reduced rates. Rebecca Lynn's name appeared on a list of tenants selected for permanent relocation to a newly acquired property in Riverside Gardens, a neighborhood where children played without fear and buildings maintained their own integrity. The apartment itself was a 2-bedroom unit with actual insulation, windows that closed properly, and a kitchen where the appliances functioned simultaneously without tripping breakers. The lease specified a monthly rent of $200, justified in the paperwork as subsidized housing for medical hardship cases. Rebecca would never know that comparable units in the building rented for $1,500, or that her subsidized rate was funded by a discreet trust Marcus had established specifically for this purpose. The second intervention required more delicate orchestration. Dr. Patricia Morrison at University Medical Center received an unexpected research grant from the Harrington Foundation for Autoimmune Research, a foundation that had existed for exactly 6 days before contacting her office. The grant sought participants for a cutting-edge lupus treatment study, all costs covered, with a modest stipend for participants' time and travel. Rebecca Lynn's name appeared on a carefully curated list of eligible candidates, her medical records having been randomly selected from the state health database. Dr. Morrison's genuine enthusiasm when she called Rebecca made the deception feel almost virtuous. Mrs. Lynn, this treatment protocol has shown remarkable results in early trials. You'd be helping advance medical science while receiving care that would normally cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. Rebecca's tearful acceptance arrived the same day the moving company, also owned by Marcus through proxy, offered their services free of charge as part of a community outreach initiative. The third intervention was simpler, but no less impactful. Harper's School received an anonymous donation establishing the Academic Merit Scholarship Fund with selection criteria specifically calibrated to ensure Harper qualified. Full tuition coverage, supplies included, with a nutrition stipend that translated to guaranteed lunch money. The school counselor who delivered the news to Rebecca described it as a miracle, never knowing how accurately she'd characterize the situation. Marcus monitored each intervention from his compound, receiving updates via encrypted messages that read like mundane business transactions. Property transfer complete. Medical enrollment confirmed. Scholarship disbursement processed. Each phrase represented a life trajectory altered, a future rewritten, all funded by the $8 currently residing in his jacket pocket as a strange and binding contract. If you're wondering whether one person's choice can really change everything, stick around, because this story is about to show you exactly how far $8 can reach when it lands in the right hands. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the incredible reunion that's coming next. Dante appeared in his office doorway, tablet in hand. Boss, the logistics are complete. The girl doesn't suspect anything beyond normal bureaucratic luck. When do you want to return the dog? Marcus checked the medical updates from Dr. Chen. Kaiser's recovery had progressed ahead of the schedule, his resilient spirit apparently matching his young owner's determination. Tomorrow morning, I'll deliver him myself. The morning sun painted Riverside Gardens in shades of gold and promise, as Marcus's Mercedes pulled to the curb outside Harper's new building. Kaiser sat in the back seat, his coat professionally groomed, his eyes bright with the alertness of an animal who'd been given a second chance and knew it. The custom leather muzzle Dr. Chen had recommended for transport lay unused. Kaiser had been perfectly calm during the drive, as if he understood this journey led somewhere important. Harper burst through the building's entrance before Marcus could exit the vehicle, her mother calling futilely after her to slow down, to be careful, to remember her manners. But manners evaporated the moment Harper saw Kaiser's familiar silhouette through the car window. The reunion happened on the sidewalk in a tangle of girl and dog, tears and laughter, Kaiser's tail whipping with such force it seemed capable of generating its own weather system. "Kaiser! Kaiser! Kaiser!" Harper chanted like a prayer, her face buried in his fur while he licked every inch of her he could reach, his entire body wiggling with joy too large to contain. "I knew he'd save you. I knew it." Marcus stood beside his car, hands in his pockets, watching this display of uncomplicated love with an expression that might have been satisfaction or might have been something more complicated. Rebecca approached cautiously, her hand extended in greeting, her eyes wet with gratitude she couldn't quite articulate. "Mr. Kane, I don't know how to thank you. Harper told me what you did, and the vet bill alone must have been—" "The contract's been fulfilled," Marcus interrupted gently. "Your daughter paid in full. We're square." He left before Rebecca could protest this obvious fiction, before Harper could launch herself at him with the same enthusiasm she'd shown Kaiser, before the scene could become something that required emotional responses he wasn't prepared to offer. Some transactions were better concluded with professional distance intact. 3 months later, on a Saturday afternoon when autumn had begun painting the city in bronze and amber, Marcus's driver appeared at Harper's door with a package wrapped in simple brown paper. Rebecca answered, suspicious of unexpected deliveries, but the driver's professional demeanor and the addressed label, "For Harper Lynn," convinced her to accept it. Inside, Harper found a collar of supple leather with brass fittings, Kaiser's name engraved in elegant script on a plate that caught the light like captured sunshine. Beneath it, a small passbook from Riverside Credit Union showed an account in her name with a balance that made Rebecca's hands tremble when Harper showed her $10,000 deposited anonymously, earmarked for education expenses. The note tucked inside was handwritten on heavy cardstock, the penmanship precise. "The boss said your $8 bought him back a piece of his own humanity. This is interest on the investment. Use it to become someone who makes the world better than you found it. MK." Harper held the collar, traced Kaiser's engraved name with small fingers, and understood, in the way children sometimes do, that she'd witnessed something rare. Power choosing mercy, strength protecting weakness. A man finding redemption in the desperate courage of a girl who'd had nothing left to lose except hope. She fastened the collar around Kaiser's neck, and it fit perfectly, as if it had always belonged there. 1 year after an $8 bill rewrote destiny, Harper Lynn walked home from school with Kaiser at her side, her backpack heavy with advanced placement textbooks that represented a future she'd once thought belonged only to other people's children. The scholarship had ripped her from the cycle of poverty and thrust her into a world of possibilities. Science competitions, college preparatory classes, dreams of veterinary school that burned bright enough to light her path forward. Rebecca's transformation defied medical probability. The experimental treatment had obliterated her lupus symptoms with such dramatic effectiveness that Dr. Morrison featured her case in a research paper. She worked full-time now at the library, her hands steady, her energy returned, her body reclaiming the strength that illness had stolen. The mother who'd once struggled to climb stairs now led story time for children, her voice clear and vibrant, no longer rationed like a precious resource that might run out. Their apartment had evolved into a sanctuary. Rebecca filled every corner with life, plants thriving on windowsills, photographs documenting their resurrection from desperation, Kaiser's awards from the therapy dog certification program Harper had enrolled him in. The walls practically hummed with the energy of people who'd been given a second chance and refused to waste a single moment of it. Kaiser had become magnificent, His coat gleamed like polished mahogany. His muscles rippled beneath fur that spoke of premium food and regular veterinary care. The psychological scars remained invisible to everyone except Harper, who sometimes caught him flinching at sudden movements before remembering he was safe now. But mostly, he radiated the confidence of a wall who'd survived hell and emerged stronger, gentler, determined to comfort others who hurt the way he once had. But Harper had discovered something that transformed gratitude into something approaching reverence. The black Mercedes appeared like clockwork, outside her school during late dismissals, parked strategically near the library when her mother worked evening shifts, idling at the corner when Harper walked Kaiser after dark. Once, when three older boys had started following her with intentions she recognized instinctively as dangerous, the Mercedes had rolled forward just enough for them to notice. They'd scattered like roaches exposed to light. She never saw Marcus Kane emerge from that vehicle, but his presence saturated every appearance. The contract signed with 8 crumpled dollars had become a blood oath, a permanent covenant that extended beyond rescue into lifelong protection. He'd accepted her desperate payment and transformed it into something sacred, a promise that transcended business, that defied his reputation, that proved even men built from violence could choose mercy when confronted with courage. What does true protection look like? It looks like a dangerous man keeping watch in shadows, keeping promises when no one's watching, proving that honor exists even in darkness. Harper would see the Mercedes and raise her hand in acknowledgement, a small wave that said, "I know you're there, and thank you, and I'll make this worth it," all at once. She never expected response, but once, just once, the headlights flashed briefly, a Morse code message that confirmed what she'd always known. He saw her, he'd always see her, and that $8 contract would outlast them both. The impossible transaction on a city street hadn't just rescued a dog. It had forged an unbreakable bond between a desperate child and a ruthless man who discovered that sometimes salvation flows both directions. And if you've made it this far without subscribing, I honestly don't know what you're waiting for. Stories like this don't come around every day, and you're literally watching the most powerful redemption arc of the year unfold for free. Hit that button. You owe it to yourself.